Chapter 31. A breakthrough peak of the 10th layer. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. Baiyan's terrifying gaze lingered on Luo Jian for some time before snorting loudly. His gaze then shifted over to the still fighting Tai Ta and Qing Mingxiang before he said in a low voice, "Are you still not stopping?" His voice boomed like thunder, as the two people were struck by the loud echo, causing them to temporarily go deaf. Tai Ta and Qing Mingxiang immediately paused, the moment they saw the vice headmaster. Tai Ta suddenly smiled with no small amount of excitement. Qing Mingxiang's face, on the other hand, changed into one full of fear. Tai Ta walked up to Jian Chen and slowly looked him over carefully. In a low voice, he whispered, "Changyang Xiang Tian, are you hurt?" Jian Chen only shook his head before giving him a meaningful stare to stay silent. Tai Ta only laughed in response. Although he had the heart and body of a tiger, he could understand the meaning behind Jian Chen's actions. Without saying anything more, he stood behind Jian Chen and remained silent as per his wishes. However, Tai Ta still continued to look carefully at Qing Mingxiang and winked at him as if to provoke him. Clearly the fight he had just now wasn't enough for him to fully enjoy it. The vice headmaster, Baiyan, shot a strong glance towards Luo Jian and Qing Mingxiang. "Luo Jian, you've already broken the rules of the academy, you know your crime." Luo Jian lifted his head in aggravation. "Vice headmaster, giving pointers amongst students is very common. Changyang Xiang Tian and I were only doing that and not anything else. As for me breaking the academy rules, your student inquires of you, which rule did I break?" "Humph, you still dare to quibble like this?" Baiyan growled. "Luo Jian, what is the 66th rule for Kargath Academy?" Luo Jian titled his head in thought before answering. "The 66th rule is that fighting in the library and the destruction of the library is prohibited." Baiyan continued to stare at him. "If it weren't for me blocking your sword chi, then I'm afraid that the library gates would have been broken by you. Luo Jian, do you recognize your crime now?" Luo Jian's face suddenly dropped after hearing that. What the vice headmaster said was correct. If the sword chi he had shot out was dodged by Jian Chen and continued onwards, then the library gates would have been broken beyond repair and might have also hurt the audience that was watching. Whether or not Jian Chen would have been able to dodge the sword chi, Luo Jian didn't dare to say. If he did voice out this scenario, then he was afraid of another charge being dropped on him. Because the school had clear-cut rules, it said that students were free to give each other pointers, but if they were to intentionally hurt someone, then they would be severely punished. Besides, he had deliberately used his sword chi to injure someone who wasn't even a saint yet, so the situation was even more complex. Although he had expected this type of end result, he had thought that he would be able to get away with more. But since the vice headmaster was here, the situation had developed into a way he hadn't expected. Right now, in Luo Jian's heart, he could only hope that the vice headmaster wouldn't give them too harsh of a punishment. "Luo Jian has recognized his crimes," he said in direction of the vice headmaster. He didn't dare be arrogant. Baiyan snorted once more to himself before saying, "Luo Jian, you have already violated one of the rules of the academy. I therefore sentence you to the contemplation hall to reflect on your crimes for a month. Do you have any objections?" The contemplation hall was where students who had violated the rules of the academy would go to. Although it had the word hall in its name, it was nothing more than a small stone house. It was smaller than a dorm room and could hold only one person within it. Once the door was closed, the person inside would be placed inside a pitch-dark room. No matter how strong the outside light was, it would not be able to penetrate through the stone house. Aside from seeing nothing, no sound would be able to get across either. Even if the strongest hail storm was happening, the person inside would not notice a thing. Luo Jian has understood with all of his heart, and has no objection, he said with a bow of his head. His tone was respectful, and no one would have thought that while he looked repentant, the poison in his heart was growing with his grievances against Jian Chen. The vice headmaster nodded his head, a jollier expression was returning to his face. "You may leave then and look for the contemplation hall yourself to reflect." Afterwards, Bayan turned his eyes towards the anxious Cheng Mingxiang. Cheng Mingxiang, even with your strength, to think that you were bullying a freshman, our Kargath Academy has lost face because of you. Cheng Mingxiang expressionlessly said, Vice Headmaster's teachings are correct. Ming Xiang understands his wrongs, and will not repeat them ever again. Cheng Mingxiang, I hope that you bear in mind, this is Kargath Academy, not your Huayan sect. If you want to continue living within Kargath Academy, then you must learn to comply with the rules. Otherwise, even if you are the young lord of the Huayan sect, you will be punished accordingly. I hope that there won't be a repeat of this event. You may leave. When it came to Cheng Mingxiang, the vice headmaster was somewhat afraid of the consequences and didn't dare to punish him anymore. Cheng Mingxiang did not utter another word, as he and his followers quietly left the place. Seeing the worst come to pass, Luo Yun, Chen Feng, and Carl did not continue to stick around, and left dejectedly. Once the crowds had dispersed, the vice headmaster's gaze rested on Jian Chen, and he smiled, you must be Changyang Xiang Tian. Jian Chen nodded, and in a tone that was neither overbearing nor servile, he replied, yes, I am him. The vice headmaster properly sized Changyang Xiang Tian up, and his previously solemn expression disappeared. He smiled and said, having not yet achieved saint level and yet still managed to force Luo Jian to summon his saint weapon, Changyang Xiang Tian, you're quite good. Vice headmaster, you're exaggerating too much. It was only due to a moment of fortune, Jian Chen plainly replied, his expression completely devoid of any arrogance. As his eyes gazed at Jian Chen's collected expression, vice headmaster, Bayan, nodded his head in praise, Changyang Xiang Tian, you need to properly cultivate and aim to become saint level as soon as possible. Many thanks to the vice headmaster's concern. I will definitely continue to cultivate diligently, Jian Chen smiled. Afterwards, Bayan's gaze returned to Tai Ta, although now that you're the headmaster's apprentice, your identity has changed, you must still remember that only by improving your own power by yourself will you really earn people's respect. Only that way can you support yourself in Tian Yuan continent. Do you understand? Tai Ta cleverly nodded, and replied in a muffled voice, Tai Ta understands. Yes. The vice headmaster nodded, and continued, although you are at the peak of talents, and your future is boundless, you cannot, under any circumstance, become confident. You must always face everything in a calm and collected manner. You also cannot learn anything from those aristocratic families, since you are now the headmaster's apprentice. Your future training will be more arduous, and you will have to spend more time on cultivation. You definitely cannot waste the headmaster's painstaking efforts. At these words, Tai Ta patted his chest and promised Bayan, vice headmaster, don't worry. I, Tai Ta, will definitely cultivate diligently. I will absolutely not make master lose face. The vice headmaster smiled and nodded, leaving the room. Once he had left, Jian Chen and Tai Ta chatted for a bit longer, and after exchanging goodbyes, Jian Chen returned to the library to read his books. When Jian Chen returned to the library, the students originally watching from within the library all disappeared without a trace. Not long after, the two moving news had traveled around the entire Kargath Academy at an unbelievable rate. The freshman martial arts competition's second place, Tai Ta, actually became Kargath Academy's headmaster's apprentice. Moreover, he had an intense fight with the cultivation genius, Cheng Mingxiang. The freshman martial arts competition's freshman ruler, Changyang Xiang Tian, used only his bare hands, and managed to force a middle saint level, Luo Jian, to use his saint weapon in a battle. Finally, Luo Jian disturbed vice headmaster Bayan, and ended up being confined in the contemplation hall for a whole month as punishment. These two pieces of news had already been spread to every corner of Kargath Academy in the short span of 2 hours' time, shocking both teachers and students alike. At the same time, Tai Ta had become the most well-known celebrity in Kargath Academy. He was originally just a commoner, but now that his identity had gone through world-shaking changes, nobles that had originally looked down on him because of his background now looked at him with new expressions. From that day on, Tai Ta had also become the child that people with varying amounts of influence tried to rope into their families. Although Jian Chen's name had also spread around the academy, it had already completely been overtaken by the extreme radiance from Tai Ta's news. However, Jian Chen paid no mind to it. Despite this, there were still many female students that looked at Jian Chen with sparkling gazes of infatuation. Jian Chen's appearance was extremely handsome, and was definitely not any lower than any other male in Kargath Academy. Combined with his unique grandeur and his powerful abilities, he was definitely a lady killer. Thus, in Kargath Academy, Jian Chen had become the White Prince in many of the girls' hearts. Ever since the battle at the library, Jian Chen's days had been anything but calm. Every time he entered the school grounds, he would be swarmed by countless male students trying to come up with various excuses to fight him. Even when he went to the library to read, he would still be harassed by quite a few people, making it so that he couldn't even read peacefully. Up until now, Jian Chen had also acted and disciplined a few people because they had been condescending children from rich backgrounds. However, perhaps because Jian Chen was too forgiving in his discipline, his attempts had close to no deterring effects, and were pretty much completely overlooked. Finally, the helpless Jian Chen was forced to bring the books back to his dorm to read under the vice headmaster's permission. Aside from reading, Jian Chen spent almost all his spare time cultivating. The time flew by, and in the blink of an eye, 3 months had already passed. It was morning, and the sun had just risen. Sitting cross-legged on his bed, Jian Chen gradually opened his eyes, and in that instant, a light flashed within his eyes. Jian Chen lowered his head and slowly spread out his palms. He saw that his hands were empty, as the Class 3 monster core he had been holding had already completely disappeared. Sensing the strong saint force flowing through his body in a manner similar to great rivers, Jian Chen finally smiled. He had broken through to the 10th saint force layer. After 3 months of cultivation, he had already broken through to the 10th layer. He was only 1 step away from reaching the saint level, and could break through at any moment. The Class 3 monster core from the freshman martial arts competition had already been completely used up by him. Although it was said that Class 3 monster core contained large amounts of energy, the amount that Jian Chen needed for his cultivation was far greater than that of an average person's. After all, the abilities that he achieved through his cultivation were extremely terrifying. Thus, a Class 3 monster core that could allow an average person at the 8th layer reach a middle saint level, could only help Jian Chen reach the peak of the 10th layer. Chapter 32. Monster Core Hunt. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Jian Chen looked outside at the sky from his window. The sun had been out for a while, so Jian Chen knew that it was no longer early in the morning. Today was a special day for Kargath Academy, since this was when they would hold a large-scale event where all the students and teachers would take part in. This event was called the Wilderness Survival. Every student would have to leave Kargath Academy to live in the forest 20 miles away for 3 days. Within the 3 days, every student had to have at least 2 Class 1 monster cores. For those who reached the saint level, then they would need 2 Class 2 monster cores. The amount of monster cores wasn't limited, but whoever got the most monster cores would be gifted with a rich reward, an Earth attribute class for monster core as well as a space ring. The reward was so tempting, that if put under the nose of the children from rich backgrounds, even they would become emotionally moved from it. At the same time, any student that had reached this standard could also access the books about various battle skills and cultivation methods on the library's 4th level. This reward was especially enticing to those from average commoner families. Battle skills were techniques that could create strong attacks. Along with the distinct uses of Saint Force, it could boost one's power to 120%, making them techniques that would completely surpass one's original abilities. On the other hand, cultivation methods could only be used when one reached the saint level. Some commoner families didn't even know the lowest level cultivation methods, and so children born in these families have to rely on the superficial breathing method given to them to cultivate Saint Force. These breathing methods were circulated around the entire Tian Yuan continent. Their steps were extremely simple, so most commoner families knew everything about these methods. The only downside was that these breathing methods could only help them cultivate to the 10th Saint Force layer, and were completely useless to people who had already reached Saint level. Thus, battle skills and cultivation methods were seen as unattainable treasures to commoners. On Tian Yuan continent, all the battle skills and cultivation methods were divided into 4 levels: Human Tier, Earth Tier, Heaven Tier, and Saint Tier. Every tier were then split into 3 separate levels: Primary, Middle and Advanced. After leaving the dorms, Jian Chen headed straight for the sports field. The event had already been announced 3 days ago, and by now, almost all the students had finished their preparations for it by sharpening themselves to the peak of their abilities. By the time Jian Chen had arrived at the sports field, the place was already swarming with people. However, it was still obvious to see that the people were split into 2 groups. One of the groups was a gathering of all the nobles, and the other group was entirely made up of commoners who did not have any major backgrounds. All the students that had not yet reached Saint level were holding a steel weapon that were glistening under the sun. Since they were facing beasts, the school administration had allowed them to choose their own weapons. Jian Chen walked over to the weapons rack. However, when he saw all the weapons there, his brows could not help but knit together. The good weapons had pretty much all been chosen by the students already, and the only ones remaining that were of decent quality were the heavy type weapons that required a lot of strength to use. They were not at all compatible with Jian Chen. Jian Chen swept a glance over the entire weapons rack. When he noticed a fractured iron rod that was about the thickness of his finger, his eyes suddenly lit up. He exerted all his strength to pull it out, only to discover that the iron rod was about 3 inches long and its surface was already completely covered in dark yellow rust marks. One of the ends had an extremely sharp point. Jian Chen weighed the rusted iron rod in his hands and then tested its sturdiness, before nodding in satisfaction. This iron rod seemed somewhat unsuitable at a glance, but its heaviness and length were compatible with Jian Chen, and amongst the remaining weapons, only this iron rod would be able to bring out most of Jian Chen's abilities. At this moment, Tai Ta walked out from the crowd. On his back was an enormous axe that was practically as large as him. It made Tai Ta seem even more impressive and powerful. Tai Ta walked up to Jian Chen and his gaze rested on the stained iron rod in Jian Chen's hands. His eyes could not help but show confusion as he asked, "Hi, Changyang Xiang Tian, what are you doing with an iron rod?" Jian Chen laughed, "What else could I do with it? Of course it's to be used as a weapon." "No way, Changyang Xiang Tian, you're actually using this lousy iron rod as a weapon. Is your brain okay?" Tai Ta asked in shock. Jian Chen chuckled and did not explain any further. Although Tai Ta could not understand why Jian Chen would use such a lousy iron rod as a weapon, he did not continue to pursue this question. Instead, he said, "Changyang Xiang Tian, how about the 2 of us team up? If we join hands, then none of the Class 1 magical beasts can obstruct us. We would even be able to overwhelm a Class 2 magical beast. Moreover, I've been hunting wild beasts in these types of forests since I was young, and I've gradually learned quite a bit of experience about surviving in the wild. If you're together with me, I promise that you won't have any hardships." Jian Chen considered it for a while. Finally, he nodded his head in agreement at Tai Ta's offer. The school did not prohibit students from forming groups of 3.5 people to kill the magical beasts, so many students ended up moving together as small groups. At that moment, a handsome noble carrying an arrogant air walked up to Tai Ta and smiled, "Hello Tai Ta, my name is Xiao Mi Si. I'm at the peak of the 10th Saint Force layer. Do you want to become partners with me? I believe that if we join hands, hunting magical beasts will be much easier for us both." Tai Ta glanced at Xiao Mi Si and shook his head. No need, Changyang Xiang Tian and I together are enough. We don't need any more people to join. Faced with Tai Ta's rejection, Xiao Mi Si did not show any despair. He turned to look at Jian Chen, and his face immediately turned haughty. This person must be Changyang Xiang Tian, the fourth lord from Lore City's Changyang clan. My father is the leader of the Xiao Mi clan in Forbidden City. Does Junior Changyang Xiang Tian welcome me into your group? Although Xiao Mi Si's words were still in a relatively respectful tone, his words hid a threatening force behind them. Forbidden City was a king's city, and when it came to the Jessan Kingdom, Forbidden City was considered to be an imperial city because the imperial palace was situated in Forbidden City. Hearing the forcefulness behind Xiao Mi Si's words, Jian Chen knit his brows. He swept his gaze over Xiao Mi Si's handsome face, and coldly replied, I apologize, but we no longer need any additional people. After all, we're only facing Class 1 magical beasts, so we don't have the time to spare babysitting others. Hearing this, Xiao Mi Si immediately turned the color of pig liver. His face darkened at Jian Chen's meaning, and it was obvious that Jian Chen was looking down on Xiao Mi Si's abilities. Xiao Mi Si's face grew stormy, and he maliciously glared at Jian Chen's indifferent expression, before coldly snorting and walking away. After Xiao Mi Si left, quite a few people from complex backgrounds approached. These people did not want to greet Tai Ta, but only wanted to join his group. However, all of them were rejected. Tai Ta had no feelings for any of this people, and he was unwilling to interact much with them. After everyone had left, a youth around 20 years old, with a tall and sturdy stature, not very different from Tai Ta's, walked over from the distance. He walked straight towards Jian Chen, and reached his hand out to strongly pat Jian Chen's shoulder and laughed, Fourth brother, you've become the school celebrity now. Amongst all of Kargath Academy's students, I'm sure that at this point, there is nobody that doesn't know of your reputation. Not bad, not bad. You haven't lost Changyang clan's face, and your older brother has been able to draw on some of your spotlight too. The sturdy youth was Jian Chen's older brother, Changyang Hu. He was currently sporting an extremely happy expression, and it was clear that his excitement was genuine. Jian Chen smiled, Big brother, stop joking around. Oh right, you've come at a perfect time. Why don't we join groups for this event? Changyang Hu shook his head as he seemed to have thought of something. He happily replied, Fourth brother, if you had asked me a week ago, perhaps your older brother would have agreed to form a group with you. However, I can't right now, because a week ago, your brother finally broke through to the saint level, thus becoming a saint. This means that during today's event, I will be entering the third layer to kill Class 2 magical beasts, so I can't be together with you. While saying this, a powerful saint force was emitted from Changyang Hu's body, his hands glowing with a yellow light, forming a large, double-edged battle-axe. The battle-axe was about as large as a wash basin, and gave off a yellow glow. Fourth brother, not bad, right? After I broke through to saint level, I was shocked to discover that I actually have the earth attribute, Changyang Hu said proudly. Saints that had attributes normally had huge advantages when fighting saints without attributes. If the two had the exact same levels of strength and fought each other, under normal circumstances, the saint with attributes would ultimately be the victor. A person could only discover if their saint force had attributes after breaking through to the saint level. Thus, anyone that had not yet become a saint were not able to detect if their saint force had attributes or not. However, the chances of having an attributed saint force were extremely low. On average, 1 out of 1,000 saints could use attributes in their saint force. In addition, pretty much all of the ones gathered in Kargath Academy were the ones that had the highest potential in all of Jessan Kingdom. That's why it was perfectly normal for many saints to have attributed saint force amongst a group of 1,000 students. Seeing the double-edged battle-axe in Changyang Hu's hands, Jian Chen could not help but happily smile, Big brother, congratulations for successfully breaking through and becoming a saint. You even have an attribute. Changyang Hu's expression was extremely happy, and he reached his hand to point at a few youths that were with him. That's right, fourth brother, I must introduce these people to you. These are the relatively outstanding children directly under my command. Their names are Changyang Ao Jian, Changyang Feng, and Changyang Xiao Tian. We greet the fourth master. The three youths simultaneously bent over in greeting, their attitudes extremely respectful. The hierarchy in the Changyang clan was extremely strict, so although they were the more outstanding members of the Changyang clan, their statuses were much lower than Jian Chen's. Even though they were all older than Jian Chen, they still had to treat Jian Chen with a respectful manner. Moreover, while saluting the younger Jian Chen, the three of them did not feel any traces of unfairness. On the contrary, they actually felt a sense of pride. After all, Jian Chen had managed to defeat the saint, Ka Di Yun, when he was only at the 8th Saint Force layer, and had managed to fight to a standstill while bare-handed against Luo Jian. Finally, he had even forced Luo Jian to use his saint weapon. All of Jian Chen's achievements made the entire Kargath Academy sigh in admiration. In the presence of the other members of the Changyang clan, they couldn't help but feel proud. Not just because Jian Chen was a member of their clan, but that because he was the fourth lord of the Changyang clan. Chapter 33. Viper, you are listening at novelfull.audio. After Jian Chen introduced Tai Ta to his older brother Changyang Hu and talked for a while before being split up by the vice headmaster Baiyan. After the headmaster Baiyan had made a speech, he had the rest of the students clean up a bit before taking away everyone's space ring in order to prevent people from storing their own monster cores within it. He gave them a cheap space belt to compensate. A single one of these belts weren't all that expensive and were actually a very common item, so the academy could afford to hand out 1,000 of them. The space within the belt was very small as well, and could only hold up to a meter squared. However, it was sufficient for holding monster cores, for now, each belt held a small amount of medication just in case of an injury. Once all of the preparations were complete, all 1,000 students left the academy in a grand exit. Heading for the forest 20 miles away, a few dozen teachers accompanied them. Their mission was to split up in the forest and rescue any student in a life-threatening situation, with the vice headmaster Bai En to lead the group. After exiting from the academy, everyone's speed gradually picked up. Since the weakest student amongst them was around the 8th Saint Force layer, the speed could definitely be faster, although they were already traveling at very fast speeds. After 2 hours of traveling, everyone finally reached the outskirts of the forest where they could all see a faint white light illuminating from within. Jian Chen looked strangely at the white light that covered the forest. He had read many books in the library, so he understood the reason behind the white light. 300 years ago, this place had been a grassy wasteland with no forest in sight. Using 1,000 people from Kargath, they finally developed the area, and after 1 year of work, a forest was created. Although at that time, the area of the forest was only 50 kilometers. After hundreds of years, the forest had developed into what it was today. After the forest had grown, Kargath Academy's headmaster Brian personally spent 3 days and 3 nights in the forest and enshrouded it in light before splitting it into 3 regions. Each region had a strong enchantment on it, and in the middle of the forest the headmaster had released weaker magical beasts to breed so that they would create stronger magical beasts for the students from the academy to learn to fight. Headmaster Brian had created this forest for the geniuses of Jessen Kingdom and expended a great amount of effort creating the forest. However, the headmaster Brian had long since retired, having another person take his role. At that moment, the headmaster walked on over and said, "Dear students, starting from today, you will have to survive in the forest for 3 days and have to hand over 2 monster cores at the very least. If you give up halfway or do not obtain 2 monster cores, then that will be considered as a loss and you will not be rewarded." His clear voice was transmitted to every student's ear. Right now, everyone will be separated. Those students who aren't a saint may partner up with someone in the second region to hunt for monster cores. For those students who are saints, please make your way towards the third region. Afterwards, everyone started to scatter while Jian Chen and Tai Ta naturally walked together. Because the area was enchanted against magical beasts, everyone who entered this area would not be attacked by any magical beast. As they entered the enchanted area, Jian Chen and Tai Ta were both already in the first region. The first region had beasts with very weak strength, so weak that they would be no match for a Class 1 magical beast. When it came to weak beasts like these, the entire Tianyuan continent just called them wild beasts, and it was only when they reached the first class that they would be considered a magical beast. All 1,000 students entered at the same time, scaring the wild animals into a sense of submission and made the trip relatively peaceful. Quickly the students all made it through the enchantments and into the second region. All of the monsters in this area were Class 1 magical beasts, so for those who weren't a saint, even a Class 1 magical beast could pose a threat to them. Entering the second region, Tai Ta and Jian Chen broke away from the rest of the students and headed for the dense parts of the forests. All around them were weeds that were as tall as a person and majorly impacted their vision. Not able to see the road, they could only look down and track the footprints left behind by the magical beasts. Changyang Xiang Tian, from here on out magical beasts will be appearing often, we definitely can't be careless. Tai Ta said with a solemn face. He had been hunting in forests for magical beasts since he was young, so it could be said that he had a rich experience about them. He also understood the dangers that lived within the forests, and if one wasn't careful, then they would lose their life easily. Jian Chen's face contained a look of conviction. Don't worry, even if you run into trouble, it doesn't mean that I'll run into trouble. With the memories from his previous world, he did not take this forest lightly. In his previous life, he had often traveled through forests, and his experience was even more extensive when it came to forests when compared to Tai Ta. Combined with the fact that Jian Chen had read up on magical beasts in a book, he learned a great deal about the magical beasts in the forest. Tai Ta held on to his giant battle axe as he watched around himself with no small amount of vigilance. Although I've killed many beasts in the past, I've never killed a magical beast. They have the same strength of a saint, so even if one was a saint, it wouldn't be a definite kill. I'm not sure if we would be able to kill a Class 1 magical beast if we come across one, and if by chance one runs away, we won't be able to catch up. Jian Chen smiled and said, Tai Ta, could it be you don't have that much faith in your own strength? Tai Ta's face started to redden as he scratched his head. With an honest answer, he said, it's not that, I have faith in my own strength. My teacher even said that my strength was strong enough to defeat the regular saint. But I've never killed a Class 1 magical beast, let alone seen one. While Tai Ta was speaking, Jian Chen's face went rigid before bringing his hand up to stop him from talking. His eyes narrowed slightly as he started to look around. Noticing how Jian Chen suddenly became serious, Tai Ta realized that danger was approaching. Holding his battle axe in front of him, he cautiously looked around at the surrounding grass. Jian Chen stared around himself for the most potential spot of danger, but the grass had been growing unhindered and healthy for years and obstructed his view, so Jian Chen wasn't able to see anything. Jian Chen's right hand clenched onto the iron rod in his hand as he blinked once. His ears started to shake as he strained to listen to his surroundings. A few deep breaths later, Jian Chen suddenly opened his eyes to reveal a bright glow to them. Straight away, Jian Chen stamped forwards with the corroded iron rod in his right hand starting to exude a bright yellow glow. Just like lightning, the rod shot forward with a whooshing sound. At the same time, a green stick suddenly flew forward from the grass like a bullet and quickly approached Jian Chen with frightening speeds. In midair, Jian Chen's rod and the green stick collided with each other, causing the green branch to stop moving. As it slowly stopped, Jian Chen saw that the iron point of the rod had pierced straight through the body of it. At that moment, the two of them suddenly realized that the stick was actually a green viper. It was as thick as an adult's arm, and the part of it that was currently visible was 2 meters long. A powerful wind rushed past Jian Chen's ear, as he saw Tai Ta swipe his large battle axe towards the viper with an ear-splitting noise. The large battle axe slashed at the viper's body, and its power was so strong that the viper was flung almost 10 meters backwards before it fell to the ground with a soft noise. However, the weeds around their current location grew so lush that, putting aside 10 meters, Jian Chen and Tai Ta could barely see 5 meters ahead of them. Hurry up and chase after it. We cannot let it hide itself. Jian Chen clearly understood how unfavorable the situation was for them. His body flashed as he chased after the viper at high speeds. Under these circumstances, if the viper managed to carefully hide away from sight, then the two of them would be in huge trouble. After all, every step in front of them was covered with weeds, and it was difficult to see anything on the ground. It would be extremely difficult to defend against the viper if it prepared to lie in wait. Without any hesitation, Tai Ta ran towards the direction that Jian Chen had raced in. Once Tai Ta caught up with Jian Chen had already stopped moving. About 3 meters away, that viper had lifted its head up high, its ice-cold eyes looking at them, its forked tongue flicking in and out. When the viper lifted its body, it was 1.5 meters tall. Its body, which was as thick as an adult's arm, had 2 wounds on it. One of them was the bloody hole that Jian Chen had left, it was so deep that the viper's bone could be seen. The other was the long wound that Tai Ta had left, it stretched down the viper's thick body. The outside of the wound was a mess of flesh, with fresh, red blood pouring down ceaselessly from it. Jian Chen's eyes cautiously followed the viper's movements. Although the viper in front of them was a species with relatively weak attack, it was still a Class 1 magical beast. Its power would not be any weaker than a saint that had already condensed his saint weapon. Tai Ta looked at the viper with a serious expression. The veins on his hands popped out as he gripped his battle-axe tightly, prepared to attack with all his strength at any moment. While both parties were in a deadlock, Jian Chen finally acted. The short 3-meter distance was nothing to him, and with a sway of his body, Jian Chen had already covered 2 meters of distance. In an instant, he appeared in front of the viper. The iron rod in his hand made an ear-piercing cry as it was thrust forward faster than the naked eye could see, headed straight for the viper that was currently 7 inches away. The viper gave a rough cry as it nimbly darted its body to the side to evade the fatal blow. Despite this, that corroded iron rod still managed to deeply pierce a hole through its body, the sharp tip poking out through its other side. See! The strong pain made the green viper cry out hoarsely, its mouth open wide. Yahe! Tai Ta's movements were quick, as he used all his strength to slash his battle-axe down hard towards the viper's head. The battle-axe passed through the fist-sized viper's head, sending it flying high up into the air. A rain of blood fell down, and fresh blood crazily spurted out from the wound on its green body. In an instant, the surrounding weeds were covered in red. Chapter 34. Casually hunting for monster cores. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Looking at the detached head spin through the air as the body spasmed spraying blood, Tai Ta's face was full of alarm. At this moment they had easily killed a Class 1 magical beast, allowing himself to feel more confident about his strength. The cyan-colored viper hadn't even made Tai Ta expend a great amount of his energy at all. Jian Chen slowly separated the body of the viper from the iron rod and wiped the blood onto the surrounding grass. It had actually been Jian Chen who contributed the most in killing the Class 1 magical beast, if it were not for his lightning-quick thrust through the viper's body and dealing it a huge wound as it was pierced, then Tai Ta's battle-axe would not have been able to sever the snake's head. Recollecting his battle-axe, Tai Ta's face looked at the detached head proudly while stepping on the viper's dead carcass. Changyang Xiang Tian, this is a Class 1 magical beast. How weak it was. Jian Chen laughed as he heard Tai Ta, it's not that the magical beasts are weak, it's because us two combined are too strong. Besides, this Class 1 magical beast wouldn't give much trouble for even a person who just recently broke through to becoming a saint. Tai Ta returned Jian Chen's smile and wiped his battle-axe dry from the blood. Bringing it to his shoulder, he let loose a laugh and said, if you say that, then doesn't that mean we can casually walk around and kill Class 1 magical beasts? It looked as if Jian Chen had came to a realization as his face revealed a joyful smile. Not bad, with our two strengths, even if we were to fight against a class 1 magical beast by ourselves we would be able to kill it easily. But if we were to join together, then no magical beast in the second region would be able to bring us trouble. The magical beasts here aren't strong because the academy had meant for them to be for students to help pick up battle experience. There won't be any strong magical beasts here, except... He trailed off in thought. Jian Chen's silence caused Tai Ta to pause. Except what? Unless we come across a group of magical beasts. However, we still don't know what's here or not. Jian Chen's face was serious as he spoke. With his strength, Jian Chen would not find any problems if he came across a class 1 magical beast, but if he came across a whole group of them, then there would be no way at all. Tai Ta wrinkled his eyebrows together and said uncertainly, that shouldn't be likely. I've been in the forests many times and never saw a whole bunch of magical beasts together. It's not for sure we won't. I've read up in the library on books pertaining to magical beasts. There are a few types of magical beasts that all live in a group together. Together, their power is strong and very rarely do they travel by themselves. Jian Chen walked over to where the decapitated snake head was and only then did he realize that the viper was only 6 to 7 meters long. Using the iron rod to cut 7 meters in, he took out the rod from the viper's body to reveal a bloody crystal. Within the Tianyuan continent, there were many different types of monster cores, while their monster cores were not at all like each other. Some magical beasts had their monster core in the head, some in the pit of their stomachs, and some in their abdomen. The viper for example had its monster core within its tail, but Jian Chen had already known that a long time ago. Ping! Tai Ta brought down the battle axe on his shoulder into a tree. It sunk into the tree as smoothly like water in a bucket before he cried out loudly, if there really are magical beasts that are in a group, Tai Ta will definitely kill them all. Jian Chen held the monster core he got from the cyan viper and rubbed it clean of blood with the nearby grass. Throwing it to Tai Ta, he said, "Alright, there's no need to yell. There's a lot of magical beasts that travel in herds in the Tianyuan continent, but it doesn't mean we'll meet up with one for sure. Nothing is for sure, after all, this is the magical beast forest." Tai Ta snatched the monster core thrown at him and looked at Jian Chen weirdly. "What are you doing giving this to me?" Jian Chen laughed, "The viper was slain by you, so this monster core is yours by rights." Seeing Tai Ta trying to find a reason against this, Jian Chen continued to say, "This monster core is yours, don't say otherwise. Just take it. After all we still have 3 more days, at our current rate we'll definitely be able to get a lot more, so I don't really care for this one monster core." "Huh, okay then. I'll be taking this monster core. The next monster core will be yours no matter who kills it then." Holding the blood-stained monster core high up in the air, Tai Ta was extremely happy. Though that was for sure since this was the first monster core he had gotten after killing a class 1 magical beast. Afterwards, the two of them continued on their way. Now that he knew that Jian Chen had an acute sense for detecting danger, Tai Ta had simply handed the patrolling duties to Jian Chen. On the other hand, he began to ceaselessly hack at the grass in front of them to clear their path. Although constantly waving the heavy battle axe around expended a great amount of energy, it was as simple as eating a meal to Tai Ta, who had godly strength. To him, this action wasn't the slightest bit taxing. After all, his strength was great enough to frighten others, and he seemed to have infinite amounts of energy as well. Thus, it was impossible for him to become exhausted in a situation like this. Not long after the two had left, Jian Chen's ears twitched, and his footsteps came to an abrupt halt. He stretched his hand out towards Tai Ta, who was currently slashing at the grass in front of them, and gestured at him to be silent. Tai Ta intuitively understood the situation, and stopped his attempt at hacking through the weeds. Tightly gripping the battle axe, he returned to Jian Chen's side, and stood shoulder to shoulder with him. Tai Ta's eyes flashed, as he inspected their surroundings with caution. Their breathing became very faint, as their expressions were filled with caution. The difference between the two was that Tai Ta was constantly looking around, while Jian Chen had gently closed his eyes in attempt to sense everything around them. It was currently extremely difficult to discern anything among the grass. Even if there really was an unknown danger lurking around, it would unfortunately not be something that one could use the naked eye to see. Thus, Tai Ta could not discover anything despite sweeping his gaze around all four corners for a long period of time. Jian Chen lightly closed his eyes, his keen ears twitching periodically as they tried to catch all noises coming from his surroundings. At the same time, his consciousness also reached new heights, and he used his powerful soul to reach out and sense the world around him. At that moment, Jian Chen could not help but recall one of his fights against Dugu Qiubai. Eventually, just as he was about to die, his powers had suddenly broken through and reached the realm of the Sword God. At that moment, his soul had become incomparably strong and could even manifest it outside his body into the surrounding air. Whenever he spread his soul out into an area, then there would be no way anyone or anything inside would be able to escape his perception. However, what made Jian Chen feel regret was that after entering this world, although his soul was extremely powerful, he could no longer extend it outwards. Otherwise, this dense forest would not give Jian Chen any difficulties at all. Searching for a hidden magical beast would be extremely easy. Jian Chen's soul densely concentrated together, and he exerted all his efforts to sense his surroundings. Slowly, his spirit entered a unique state. Although he had not extended his soul, at that instant, his soul seemed to have established a subtle relationship with the various plants around him, fusing together. This feeling was extremely mysterious. However, as soon as Jian Chen entered this state, his senses immediately shot up to new levels. Finally, a barely discernible breathing sound entered his sensing range. The breath was so faint that even if one stood next to it, one most likely wouldn't have been able to hear it. In an instant, Jian Chen opened his eyes, and in a flash, he had already disappeared from his original location, and was flying towards the side at high speeds. While moving, Jian Chen constantly twisted and adjusted his body to evade the branches obstructing his path. In an instant, Jian Chen had already crossed over a distance of 10 meters. He quickly thrusted out the iron rod in his hands at lightning-fast speed, silently cutting away the surrounding leaves and weeds, the tip aimed towards the black figure hiding within the grass. Ayo! A shriek of pain suddenly rang out, as a dark shadow jumped out from the grass, leaping towards Jian Chen with its ferocious mouth wide open. This was a black panther, around 2 meters long. Its head had an open wound where fresh blood was pouring out from. The blood flowed down through the black fur on its face, intensifying its fierce appearance. Jian Chen's gaze was as sharp as a sword as a sneer began to form on his face. He shook his arm, and once again lashed out with the iron rod in his hand at an unfathomable speed, his objective being the Black Panther's neck. Up until the end, the Black Panther had absolutely no time to react, as the iron rod's sharp point plunged deeply through its throat. In addition, since the Black Panther's body was currently lunging in the air, its heavy body quickly dropped downwards, pushing the iron rod deeper and deeper through its neck. Eventually, the point had drilled a hole directly through, and the end had come out of the other side. This time, the Black Panther didn't even have the time to cry out before it had already died. It fell to the ground with its eyes wide open, grief instilled in its gaze. At that moment, Tai Ta finally caught up from behind. When he looked over at the ground, he saw the corroded iron rod pierce through the Black Panther's throat. Immediately, his eyes widened in extreme shock. Changyang Xiang Tian, this did you kill this? Tai Ta's voice was trembling in shock. Even though he had witnessed the moment that Jian Chen's weapon had pierced through the Black Panther's throat, he still couldn't believe the scene no matter how hard he tried. That was because the period of time that had passed was way too short. When Jian Chen had charged over, Tai Ta had already followed behind at his fastest speed. However, by the time he had caught up, all he saw was the Class 1 magical beast dying by Jian Chen's hands. The amount of time that had passed was definitely not even long enough to take a breath, or even half a breath. Being able to kill a Class 1 magical beast in half a breath's time was natural for some professionals. However, Tai Ta clearly knew that Jian Chen's abilities had not yet reached saint level. Moreover, the weapon he was using was a mere corroded iron rod. Jian Chen placed his foot on the Black Panther's head, and gradually pulled out the iron rod. As if nothing had happened, he said, "That's right, I killed it." However, it was just a coincidence. Originally, there was no way it would have died so quickly. However, it kept approaching my weapon, and in the end, its life was extinguished before it could even cry out in despair. Hearing this, Tai Ta rubbed the back of his head, and doubtfully glanced at Jian Chen's indifferent face. In disbelief, he asked, "Is that true? You're not lying to me?" Jian Chen laughed, "Of course it's true. Why would I lie to you?" Seeing Jian Chen's sincere expression, Tai Ta was beyond puzzled, and muttered, "Do such stupid magical beasts really exist, to actually give itself up to a weapon?" Chapter 35. Liang Xiaola. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Taking out the Black Panther's monster core, Jian Chen and Tai Ta continued on their trip to kill magical beasts. To easily kill a Class 1 magical beast while not having the strength of a saint was something that any new student would have said was an incomparably difficult task. Life-threatening dangers could happen at any time, but to Jian Chen and Tai Ta, it was almost as if they were playing a game. The second region was like a treasure trove of monster cores for those two. The day passed quickly and nightfall came. Both Jian Chen and Tai Ta found an open area in the forest to camp out in. Between them was a campfire with a fire that pulsed as it illuminated the pitch blackness. The two boys' shadows danced behind their backs, making their reflections seem like devils threatening each other. The darkness surrounded them from all four corners, and if they were to go outside the range of the bright fire, then they wouldn't even be able to see their own hands in front of their faces in the darkness. It wasn't that peaceful, however, as somewhere in the distant forest, a magical beast could be heard howling away. Just the sound of it would terrify anyone, and for someone who was absolutely scared already, the sound would cause them to be scared stiff. Tai Ta turned the monster core in his hand over the fire, causing the light of the fire to shine on it. One look at the two boys revealed that their clothes were not in great condition and were splattered with blood. The blood was all from magical beasts while their clothes had been cut open due to the thorny shrubbery. "Changyang Xiang Tian, you're really awesome. I didn't think that you would be able to wield a corroded iron rod to such an amazing degree. All of the magical beasts we fought against today were killed by you. It was only the initial viper from earlier that I managed to kill." Tai Ta exclaimed as he heaped praise onto Jian Chen. Jian Chen's face had a big smile on it. "I only took a chance when I saw one. If it weren't for you dealing out damage with your axe, then it would have been even harder to kill those magical beasts." Tai Ta laughed, his heart finally taking comfort in his words. "Changyang Xiang Tian, could you tell me, how is it that you're able to tell if we're near a magical beast or not?" Tai Ta was naturally very curious about this. The whole day he had been puzzling over it, but it was only now that he found the perfect time to ask. Jian Chen didn't bother to hide anything and instead pointed at his ear and head. "I used this and this." Tai Ta looked at Jian Chen point at his ears and head in a curious way before asking, "You use your ears to listen and your mind to think. You're only half correct." Jian Chen took the iron rod by his side and began to polish it on a small chunk of rock. Absent-mindedly responding, he said, "Aside from relying on my ears to listen, I use my spirit to feel my surroundings. However, this method would be too difficult for you to do." "Oh." Tai Ta nodded his head in understanding while thinking it over in his head. Jian Chen felt the fine point of the iron rod before putting it down. Grabbing onto his space belt, he said, "Tai Ta, let us check out our earnings from today." Shaking his space belt, the stored monster cores began to fall out. Bedodem one after another, monster cores started to drop out from the space belt and gradually the spot in front of Jian Chen began to pile up with monster cores until it was a foot high. Tai Ta followed suit and started to shake his own space belt. In the end, a small mountain piled up in front of him as well. I have 48 monster cores here. Jian Chen laughed, his profits for today had been huge. I have 49 here, I've beat you by 1. Tai Ta was extremely happy, he had never seen this many cores before. This was a first for him, since he had never even seen a single monster core before. To Tai Ta, who was born in a common household, these monster cores had a huge price tag on them despite all of the cores being class 1. For the first day to be this profitable, not bad. I don't know how many monster cores we'd need in order to be the ones with the most monster cores. After all, the prize is quite rich, a class 4 monster core and a space ring. Even Jian Chen had been tempted by the prizes, he really wanted that class 4 monster core, the energy inside would be many times stronger than a class 1 monster core. At this moment, Jian Chen's eyes suddenly grew dark as he whispered, quickly store all of the monster cores, people are coming. After saying that, he immediately started to store all of the cores into his belt and put it back on. Tai Ta moved quickly as well, the moment he heard Jian Chen start, he had already started to store all of the monster cores. Tai Ta had finished by the time Jian Chen did. After the two had stored their monster cores away, after a few nervous breaths, the distant grass moved to the side with a rustling sound as a very thin person came walking out. The moment the person saw both Tai Ta and Jian Chen sitting by a fire, a look of surprise came over their face before suddenly letting loose a cry of joy. It was a weak little lady holding onto a rice straw for support who came stumbling over. I finally found someone, I finally found someone. I beg of you, please don't leave me behind. I'm afraid, really afraid. The magical beasts want to eat me. The person's voice was fairly frantic and was full of panic, however, her voice was still gentle somehow. Hearing her, Jian Chen and Tai Ta then realized the person in front of them was a girl as the fire behind them illuminated her body, showing her Kargath Academy uniform to the both of them. However, the uniform had been cut open by the branches and thorns, some parts of her body could already be seen underneath and even her underwear could be seen poking out. The uniform itself was muddy as if she had fallen multiple times. The girl's face was dirty with mud to the point where her appearance couldn't even be seen clearly. However, on her face could be seen evidence of her crying as she pleadingly looked at Jian Chen. Looking at the pitiful sight, there was nothing but helplessness reflected in her eyes. Sit down. Jian Chen tried to make himself as kind as possible, looking at her situation, he had guessed what type of trouble had taken place. In this environment, even the most reckless of boys would feel horrified, let alone a little girl. Seeing that the person was actually a pretty girl, Tai Ta's guard loosened. Carefully putting down the battle axe in his hands, he looked at the girl curiously. Jian Chen calmly looked at the young girl, and asked, "Can you tell me what your name is?" "My name is Liang Xiaola," the young girl stuttered back. Seeing both Jian Chen's and Tai Ta's eyes flash, she could not help but feel fear, as well as some faint traces of concern and insecurity. "Why is a lady like you not with others? If you're so afraid, why would you walk through this forest alone? Just a few random sounds have even scared you to such an extent," Tai Ta asked in a muffled voice. Liang Xiaola looked at Tai Ta timidly before she said quietly, "I came here with a few friends at first, but unfortunately we came across a magical beast. That magical beast was quite strong, and my group of friends weren't able to beat it. Soon after most of us were injured and we all scattered to run away, but I got lost." Hearing this, Tai Ta began to choke on his own saliva before saying, "Even with a group you were unable to beat a class 1 magical beast. How useless, just Changyang Xiang Tian and I have already killed over 100 magical beasts today." A proud look came over his face as he remembered that fact. Gulyalu. At that moment, a strange sound suddenly rang out. In an instant, Jian Chen and Tai Ta both directed their gazes to the origin of the sound. It turned out to be Liang Xiaola's stomach, which at the moment, still would not stop grumbling loudly. "You must be hungry," Jian Chen smiled. Yes. Liang Xiaola nodded in embarrassment, and delicately said, I haven't eaten all day. The corner of her eyes could not help but light up as she glanced at the bonfire, where the finely cooked, golden magical beast meat was currently dripping with rich oils. She greedily inhaled its aroma, but the more she did this, the louder her stomach grumbled. Eventually, both Jian Chen and Tai Ta could only hear rumbling sounds in their ears. Jian Chen smiled. He picked up the skewer with the magical meat on it, and unafraid of the heat, directly used his hand to tear off a large chunk of the meat. Handing it over to Liang Xiaola, he said, Go on and eat this. Be careful, it's hot though. Liang Xiaola twisted her hands, and ripped the corners of her clothes to wipe clean the dirt on her hands. Tenderly, she reached over to receive the magical beast meat. Once it had cooled down, she directly ate it with large mouthfuls, not caring to keep up her appearance in the least. Liang Xiaola was probably starving, because after she quickly finished that large piece of meat, she still gazed at the remaining piece with a wistful look in her eyes. Jian Chen smiled, and ripped off another large chunk of magical beast meat. He handed it over to Liang Xiaola and said, Go ahead and eat this. Seeing the piece of magical beast meat that had placed in front of her, Liang Xiaola hesitated for a bit, and in the end, still didn't reach out to receive it. Instead, she gazed at Jian Chen and Tai Ta and softly asked, If I finish it, what will you guys eat? Tai Ta laughed, Don't worry, we still have another one left. Look under that tree. As he said this, Tai Ta extended a finger to point in the direction. Liang Xiaola looked at where Tai Ta was pointing, and sure enough, she noticed that underneath a large tree nearby, an unknown magical beast had fallen to the ground. One of its legs had already disappeared, and the ground was covered with fresh blood marks. Staring at the magical beast's corpse, Liang Xiaola swallowed hard and said, You guys are really formidable. To think that the two of you alone could kill a Class 1 magical beast. Che, what does that mean? Tai Ta said, completely unperturbed. The time stealthily flew by. Jian Chen and Tai Ta had finished eating, and were now preparing to rest. Hey, where should I sleep? Liang Xiaola asked with difficulty. Jian Chen pointed at a large tree not too far away and said, Go rest on top of that tree. That way, even if magical beasts try to attack in the middle of the night, you won't be harmed. Ah, magical beasts still attack during the night. Liang Xiaola's face turned ashen at these words. Her eyes were filled with fear, and her whole body began to tremble. Then what about you guys? Where would you guys go? You can't just leave me behind alone, otherwise I'll definitely be eaten by some savage magical beast, Liang Xiaola asked in a panicked tone. She nervously glanced at Jian Chen and Tai Ta, as if afraid for her life if they ran away and abandoned her. Jian Chen internally sighed. He really couldn't do anything about the cowardly Liang Xiaola. People like her who had been born and raised in noble families as a precious little girl had never experienced the stormy sea. From birth, she had grown up into a sheltered environment, so encountering any danger drove her heart and mind into disarray. Don't worry, we won't go far. We're just going to rest in the other tree over there, Jian Chen said. Liang Xiaola felt slightly comforted after hearing these words. However, traces of fear still remained in her heart, refusing to go away. That damned school, that damned headmaster. Why do they have to force everyone to attend this type of event for no reason at all? Isn't this just deliberately trying to send us to our deaths? Whenever she thought about how she had gotten into her current situation, Liang Xiaola could not help but start cursing in anger. Eventually her words gradually began to turn into sobs. Chapter 36. A Pack of Wolves. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. During the night, Jian Chen and Tai Ta sat under a tree cultivating. The torch by their side had long since burned out, and in a tree branch 5 or 6 meters above them, was Liang Xiaola. She nervously looked around whenever she heard the howl of a magical beast in the night. She wasn't able to sleep at all. Liang Xiaola's bright eyes looked down at the cultivating pair, Jian Chen and Tai Ta, as if she was monitoring them. In her eyes, this was a matter of life or death. She did not want to see the two people she had found, after a long time of searching, to abandon her and lose her only type of protection. At that moment, a light breeze blew through the forest and through the tall grass. Meanwhile, the cross-legged Jian Chen suddenly opened his eyes. Immediately, his eyes grew bright as he stared deep into the tall grass, before standing up onto the ground with the iron rod in his hand. Liang Xiaola was confused as she watched Jian Chen stand up. Not knowing what was happening, her heart was suddenly very agitated. "Hey, what's happening?" Liang Xiaola whispered carefully. In this situation, she didn't dare use a loud voice to speak, for fear of attracting another magical beast. Jian Chen didn't answer her and instead turned to the still cultivating Tai Ta. "Tai Ta, wake up, some magical beasts are attacking." "Ah, what did you say?" "Magical beasts are attacking." Liang Xiaola became frightened, her face instantly draining of color. Thinking about what was about to happen, her whole body began to shake in fear. While Tai Ta was cultivating, he didn't dare immerse himself completely, so he still remained on guard while cultivating. Thus, when Jian Chen called for him, Tai Ta immediately woke from his cultivation state and stood up with his battle-axe rested against his shoulder. "Changyang Xiang Tian, where are the monsters?" he asked as he looked around. He couldn't see any footprints around them, or even hear a single sound. Jian Chen slowly turned his head as he looked around. "Tai Ta, this time, be careful. This time it isn't a single magical beast, but a group of them." "A group?" Tai Ta's face immediately changed from careless to surprise, then it hardened into a ready expression. "Ah! What? A group? It can't be. Hey guys, please don't scare me like that." Hiding in the trees, Liang Xiaola pleaded with them. She would have rather heard a threat from Jian Chen than this. Jian Chen's eyebrows knitted together before lightly commanding the crying Liang Xiaola, "Could you please be quiet? Do you want to attract magical beasts from all over?" Jian Chen's command proved to be extremely useful, as Liang Xiaola immediately used her hand to clamp her mouth shut to make sure she didn't say anything. "Changyang Xiang Tian, how many magical beasts do you think there are?" Tai Ta asked. "A lot, 10 at the very least. They're all prepared to attack and already have us surrounded." Jian Chen's face was very grave. Tai Ta's expression grew hard as he heard Jian Chen. If it was just one magical beast, he wouldn't have been worried. 3 magical beasts and the both of them combined could take them on. But now that there were at least 10 of them, Tai Ta didn't dare to have a swelled head now. When Liang Xiaola had heard Jian Chen, her already pale face had turned even paler, and her mind was racked with fear. Only one thought was occurring in her head: "It's over, we're screwed. We're not going to survive this." The tall grass began to sway as a cyan-colored light appeared in front of them. There was one in every direction, with no less than 50 points of origin. As Jian Chen and Tai Ta looked on amazed, they realized the bright spots of light were actually the eyes of magical beasts, and there were at the very least 20 of them. "This is a Class 1 magical beast Blue Wolf. Tai Ta, if you want to live, hurry and climb up a tree now," Jian Chen said as he looked at the 20 blue wolves from all 4 directions. Tai Ta glared in anger before brandishing his battle-axe. With a heroic voice he said, "Don't worry. Changyang Xiang Tian, there are only 20 Class 1 magical beasts, I guarantee they won't take us down." The moment she heard that there were 20 wolves invading, Liang Xiaola was practically scared to death. At this time, even if she believed in Jian Chen's and Tai Ta's strengths before, she would never believe that their strengths would be able to beat 20 magical beasts, as they hadn't even reached sainthood yet. Unless one of the school teachers were to come save them now, they wouldn't be able to escape alive. "Teacher, where are you? Please come save us." Liang Xiaola looked around in all directions as she pleaded for a teacher to come. She could only trust that the teachers would come to save them now, but it was a shame that there were so many magical beasts, so she was too scared to cry out too loudly. Just in case the magical beasts focused on her. The 20 blue wolves slowly walked towards Jian Chen and Tai Ta, their oily gazes staring attentively at them. It was only when their distance was less than 5 meters away that they stopped moving. Jian Chen and Tai Ta grabbed onto their respective weapons. Although they were surrounded by 20 magical beasts, neither of the two had a single expression of fear. Ayo! Suddenly, a blue wolf started to cry out into the sky. Immediately afterwards, the 20 wolves surrounding them started to howl as well. Their howls filled the air as they began to overlap with each other, before turning into a large sound wave that targeted a wide area. Hearing the wolves howl, Liang Xiaola's entire body slipped. Her body fell to the ground as she started to tremble. At this point, her face was entirely drained of blood, and had become a deathly pale shade. 5 kilometers away from Jian Chen, a middle-aged male dropped down onto a tree branch. When he heard the howls, his face changed. His previously closed eyes opened as he stared off towards the direction of the sound. Not good, that's a pack of blue wolves. Judging by the howls, there are at least 10 of them. It looks like someone has met up with danger then. The middle-aged man's face grew solemn as his hands touched the tree he was standing on. He jumped down from the tree before sprinting off towards the direction of the howls without stopping. I hope that I can make it. The middle-aged man was anxious, but he was already going at the fastest speed he could possibly go at. The magical beasts in the second area weren't that strong, but the opponents Jian Chen and Tai Ta were facing were Class 1 magical beast blue wolves. Their chances of success weren't looking well. At the same time, in 3 different places, 3 different people all heard the yell before putting down whatever was in their hands and quickly started to run towards the howl. The wolves' howl was the signal for the wolves to attack, as the 20 wolves suddenly rushed at Jian Chen and Tai Ta. Go die! Tai Ta snarled as he brought his battle axe up in preparation to strike. He swiped at a nearby wolf with his axe, slamming the axe into its stomach. The wolf cried out with an ear-piercing shriek. Pine! The blue wolf that charged at Tai Ta was immediately cut down by his battleaxe's powerful attack, and it now sported a giant wound on its body. The wolf was sent flying away from the mighty swing. Despite it being a Class 1 magical beast, it was no match for Tai Ta's strength. Tai Ta brandished his 100-pound battleaxe with ease as if it wasn't heavy at all. Whenever a blue wolf approached, he would send it flying away. Thus, any wolf that got too close to him was sent flying, with a new wound on its body. However, the skin of a blue wolf was tough, so even Tai Ta couldn't kill one with ease. As the wolves approached him at the same time, Jian Chen's eyes instantly grew cold as he dashed forward. In a flash, he brought the sharpened iron rod through the throat of a nearby wolf. Pooh! With some resistance, the iron rod finally pierced through the wolf's hide and bore through the wolf's throat. He took out the rod and tilted his body to the side to dodge the attack of another wolf who jumped at him. The wolf who had its throat pierced by Jian Chen fell helplessly to the ground, as its 4 legs spasmed in its final death throes. It couldn't stand up on its legs no matter how much it tried, as bright red blood leaked out from its wound. The throat was the weak point for almost every single living thing, and magical beasts were no exception. Right now, since the blue wolf had its throat skewered, its life was quickly fading. Even though it was trying to avoid the temptation of death, its struggle would not last long. Jian Chen relied on the nimbleness of his body to weave in and out of the pack of wolves, and he used his iron rod to leave behind stab wounds wherever he attacked. Despite being surrounded by 10 wolves, Jian Chen had used his strange but unpredictable style of movement to dodge with ease. The sharp teeth and the claws of the wolves couldn't touch him at all, and whenever it had seemed like the wolves would be able to get him, Jian Chen moved out of the way just in time. The battle hadn't even lasted for more than a few deep breaths before 3 of the wolves had their throats pierced by Jian Chen. As the wolves lost blood, they stumbled to the ground in a final struggle to live, but after one final breath, they died on the ground. Many of the wolves had suffered from multiple wounds, but none of them were fatal, and were focused on the joints of the beasts. Jian Chen proceeded to travel in between the wolves as the iron rod in his hand continued to stab at them. Not only were his movements swift, but there was a certain grace to them. It was almost as if he was dancing instead of fighting for his life. On the other side, Tai Ta let loose a snarl and brought his 100-pound battle-axe down through the air, producing an after-image thanks to the speed. The few wolves surrounding him were continuously sent flying through the air with exceptionally terrifying wounds. Although the wounds were from Tai Ta's sharp battle-axe, to the blue wolves, these injuries would not threaten their lives at all. Although Tai Ta was looking quite powerful and majestic at this moment, he was not invincible. And with Jian Chen's success so far, Tai Ta's own achievements were nothing much. After all, ever since the start of the battle, Tai Ta had not yet been able to kill a single blue wolf. Chapter 37. Teacher's Shock. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. A mere few seconds passed. Another wolf died by Jian Chen's hands, while countless others were being injured. The cowering Liang Xiaola didn't hear Tai Ta's or Jian Chen's screams of pain at all. All she could hear was the howling of the blue wolves mixed in with whimpers. Because of her curiosity, she fought her fear and looked down on the ground, and her eyes grew wide in shock. She couldn't believe that Jian Chen and Tai Ta were still fighting the blue wolves, and she was shocked speechless. Every single swing from Tai Ta's axe was capable of smashing a wolf into the air with ease. No wolf was able to get close to him because of that, and most of the blue wolves were covered with frightening wounds that had covered their entire bodies with blood. Jian Chen, on the other hand, was moving rapidly between the wolves and attacking them from every direction. Whenever he thrusted his iron rod forward, another wolf would be riddled with wounds. His movements were too fast for Liang Xiaola to follow. The only thing she could see was a constant blurs. She had never experienced such a hair-raising bloody spectacle like the one below, but on the outside, her face had already started to regain some color. However, her body had not yet stopped trembling. After all, it was her first time seeing such a bloody mess, and no matter who it was, a person wouldn't be able to take in a sight like this easily their first time. At that moment, a blue wolf took advantage of Tai Ta's lack of attention, and jumped at his shoulder. Using its strong teeth, it bit deeply down on his shoulder and blood started to flow freely from the wound. The acute pain caused Tai Ta's face to darken as he looked at the blue wolf biting at his shoulder. Tai Ta's eye blinked in pain as he looked at the blue wolf with a fierce glare. Dropping his battle-axe, his right hand grabbed onto the wolf's head, and with his monstrous strength, he ripped the wolf off his shoulder, leaving behind deep incisions in his skin. Tai Ta grabbed onto the wolf's snout with both hands, and the veins in his arms swelled up with his muscles. With a furious roar, his hands gripped onto the yelping wolf and tore its head from its body. At the same time, blood splattered everywhere onto Tai Ta, dyeing him blood red. Tai Ta's act of strength caused the surrounding wolves to cower in fear, as they watched Tai Ta hold on to the two halves of the wolf's carcass. But Tai Ta didn't plan to let the wolves get away. Dropping the body, he picked up his battle-axe and sliced down onto another wolf's head. The wolf tilted its head and dodged Tai Ta's battle-axe. Bringing its head up towards the sky, it let out a great howl before launching itself at him. Hearing the howl, all of the wolves had their fear dispelled, as they instantly charged at Tai Ta. Tai Ta sent a kick towards the abdomen of a wolf, sending it flying through the air. The sharp blade of his battle-axe cut into the neck of the wolf. Leaving behind a trail of blood, the wolf flew backwards like a rocket. After his battle-axe had chopped through the head of a wolf, Tai Ta stopped where he stood. He brandished his battle-axe in a menacing way for the other wolves to see. Pang! A wolf was too late in dodging and was hit by Tai Ta's battle-axe. The wolf was split in two as it gave one last final howl. After being injured, it looked as if Tai Ta became even stronger. In a flash, he had already killed two wolves. Jian Chen, on the other hand, was still wrestling fiercely with the wolves. Suddenly, a wolf jumped from above, down onto Jian Chen. Jian Chen immediately turned around and glared at the incoming wolf with his flashing eyes. The iron rod in his hand shot forth like lightning and stabbed deep into the wolf's abdomen, piercing its heart. The moment he felt the rod stop, he immediately pulled it out and then moved away from his position. The moment he left from his spot, the group of blue wolves immediately lunged at him. The wolf that had been skewered in the heart whimpered as it gave its final breath, and fell down to the ground, spasming before finally becoming still. The battle persisted for some time, and as time passed, the amount of blue wolves that had died by the hands of Jian Chen and Tai Ta grew larger and larger. Gradually, the pressure on the two boys reduced, as the number of blue wolves dwindled. Jian Chen pulled out his iron rod from another wolf's throat. He had already killed over 10 blue wolves, yet his clothes were relatively unstained by the blood. Jian Chen looked at Tai Ta only to see 7 or 8 blue wolves left. However, each of the 8 wolves were already bloody, as if they had been bathed in blood. His already ragged clothing was becoming even worse, and was almost like a strip of cloth now. His clothes were no longer protecting his body, and instead revealed his chest underneath. Even the trousers had rips in parts, with blood dripping from the wounds beneath it. Without any hesitation, Jian Chen rushed towards Tai Ta and immediately started to fight off the 8 wolves with his iron rod. Because Tai Ta had gave the wolves many heavy injuries in a long battle, the wolves were all exhausted beyond relief, so Jian Chen's job was relatively easy. Without expending much energy, he ended their lives by accurately piercing each of the wolves' throats. After the invasion of the pack of wolves, even Jian Chen couldn't help but breathe hard. Even though he was not weak at all, he had used up the majority of his energy to fight against the pack of wolves. Tai Ta let out a long sigh as he looked at the pile of dead bodies around him. On his face was a happy smile. Although they had just fought a long and hard battle, he didn't show a single trace of exhaustion. Instead, his fighting spirit was awakened. Changyang Xiang Tian, let's kill the rest of the Class 1 magical beasts. Tai Ta laughed. In his lifetime, he had never killed a Class 1 magical beast before, so it was natural that he was excited. Jian Chen smiled as well before looking at the wounds on Tai Ta. You're hurt, how bad is it? Tai Ta looked down on his body to inspect his wounds before saying, it's no problem. Although the bites hurt, they're mostly superficial wounds. Hee, my skin has been thick since I was small, so regular beasts could never bite me before. Jian nodded his head in understanding with a thoughtful face. He knew about Tai Ta's strength and vitality firsthand. Tai Ta was even stronger than a steel bar, so the blue wolves must have been ferocious to bite through his skin. Ah, that's right, Changyang Xiang Tian, are you hurt? Tai Ta asked with concern as he looked at Jian Chen. Jian Chen shook his head, don't worry, the wolves didn't hurt me at all. He shifted his stare to the tall grass and said loudly, haven't you seen enough? How long do you plan on hiding there? Hearing Jian Chen, Tai Ta went blank for a second as he was puzzled by what Jian Chen was saying. But he soon figured it out and immediately grabbed onto his battle axe with both his hands. Who's hiding over? Hurry up and come out, otherwise I'll chop you in half. Tai Ta yelled. As Tai Ta spoke, the tall grass rustled before them as 4 figures leapt out in front of Tai Ta and Jian Chen. Seeing the 4 shadows jump out, Tai Ta immediately went on the defensive, while Jian Chen didn't move a muscle except for a small smile on his face. Although they couldn't see the appearances of the 4 due to the darkness, but Jian Chen had long since guessed their identities. When the 4 shadows reached 2 meters away from Jian Chen, they suddenly stopped. Jian Chen could finally see their faces clearly. 2 of them were middle-aged men while there was an elder and a 30-year-old female. All 4 of them had a look of astonishment and were stupefied as if they saw an inconceivable event. Honorable teachers, so it was you. Tai Ta finally recognized the 4 people and cried out in surprise. The 4 people quickly regained their composure, but their eyes still revealed traces of shock. Changyang Xiang Tian, no wonder there are rumors about you being able to beat a saint. I didn't think too much about it at first, but after seeing this, the rumors have to have some sort of truth to them. For a single person to use a corroded iron rod to kill dozens of Class 1 magical beasts, even saints who condense their saint weapons wouldn't be able to replicate this easily. The elder said with a laugh as he praised Jian Chen. Jian Chen laughed and said, "Honored teacher gives this one too much praise. My strength isn't as strong as you think. The wolves may have been Class 1 magical beasts, but their attack power wasn't that high. If I had came across a stronger Class 1 magical beast, then I'm afraid I would have struggled a lot more." Hearing this, the elder looked at Jian Chen appreciatively before looking at Tai Ta with a laugh. "Tai Ta, your strength is also very strong, it's no wonder the headmaster noticed you and took you in as an apprentice." Tia Ta scratched his head with a modest smile, but he didn't know what to say in response to that. "Elder Yun, it would appear that we came here for nothing. These two are absolutely abnormal in strength, nothing in the second region would be a match for them," said the 30-year-old woman. The other three bitterly smiled as they listened to her. When they had heard the howls of the wolves, they naturally knew that a student was in danger. For that reason alone they had all rushed towards the howls at the fastest speed possible to rescue them. On the way, each one of them prayed that the students would be able to hold on for as long as possible, but when they had arrived, they were subjected to an inconceivable sight. Two students who weren't at the saint level had been able to fend off 20 or so blue wolves without trouble. In the end, they had been able to slaughter all 20 of them, and none of the four could believe their eyes at this end result. Chapter 38. Liang Xiaola, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Oh, by the way, Changyang Xiang Tian, how did you detect us? A middle-aged man asked, his tone full of curiosity. The other three teachers were curious to know as well as they stared at Jian Chen. The four of them were extremely interested in knowing how they were detected while hiding in the tall grass because they had not made a single sound or made any movement, so there was no way that they would have been noticed by Jian Chen. Jian Chen laughed and said, "I had found out the moment the honorable teachers arrived." "What? You found out the moment we arrived? How is that possible?" the woman cried out in disbelief. The other three people couldn't believe what Jian Chen said either. Jian Chen opened his mouth. "While I was fighting the pack of wolves, I was still paying attention to my surroundings. Otherwise, we might have been subjected to random attacks from someone else. How would I dare lose track of what was happening around me at such a crucial point?" Hearing this, the four teachers nodded, approving of what Jian Chen had just said. Jian Chen continued to explain, "The honorable teachers didn't make a single sound at all, but when you arrived I saw a bunch of obvious movements, so I found out since the very beginning." Hearing this, the four people realized their mistakes as the elder sighed in admiration. "Amazing, just amazing. Changyang Xiang Tian, I really have no other choice but to admire you. And to think that when I was your age, I was nowhere near the level you are now." The elder then paused before saying, "Since you students aren't in any danger, then we'll take our leave now. After all, there are still students to save." Although the elder had said that, he looked as if he was reluctant to leave. "Please wait." Jian Chen suddenly cried out towards the four teachers. Pointing at Liang Xiaola who was still hiding in the tree, he said, "Honored teacher, could you please help escort this student out? She doesn't have the courage to stay here any longer." The teacher frowned as he thought about it. "This won't be a problem, but even if she hands over 2 Class 1 monster cores, this will still be considered as a loss. After all, she didn't stay here for all 3 days. No, I won't leave, I'll definitely stay here for all 3 days." Liang Xiaola said from the treetop as she dropped 5 or 6 meters down onto the ground. In one long stride she went over to where Jian Chen was. "Hey, these 4 teachers can take you out of this forest so you won't have to worry about magical beasts hurting you. Why don't you want to go home?" Tai Ta was rather discontent, since Liang Xiaola was really too cowardly. The moment she saw a magical beast she cried out loud. This really annoyed Tia Ta. Liang Xiaola looked at Tai Ta timidly and whispered, I don't want to go. Could it be you're no longer afraid of magical beasts? Tai Ta asked curiously. I am. So you're scared after all, then why don't you want to get out of here, Noel.n, because you too are still here. With such a straightforward answer, Tai Ta couldn't find a response. Jian Chen looked at Liang Xiaola helplessly before trying to persuade her, Liang Xiaola, you should go with the teachers, the magical beasts in this forest are many, and so there's no guarantee that we can protect you. Liang Xiaola's face became miserable as she realized that she would need to depend on Jian Chen. Imploring, she said, Senior, please let me go with you, this was my first time seeing a magical beast and the first time I've been here. That's why I was scared initially. But I guarantee you, the next time we come across a magical beast, I won't cry out loud. After experiencing Jian Chen's and Tai Ta's strengths, Liang Xiaola wouldn't have to worry about getting into any trouble with those two around. Plus, Liang Xiaola had clearly that the four teachers all said that the second region of the forest had nothing that they couldn't handle. So with such good protection, there was no way she would give up that easily. Jian Chen suddenly felt a headache coming. Liang Xiaola was a pampered noble since birth, so she would definitely be a burden to them. When they battled any magical beasts in the future, they would have to look after her as well. Changyang Xiang Tian, with you and Tai Ta, there are no magical beasts in the second region that can pose a threat to you. So you might as well take her along. Students should look out for one another. And besides, for you too, this shouldn't even be considered a test anymore. Laughed the middle-aged woman. Jian Chen inwardly sighed in exasperation. Since even the teachers wanted Liang Xiaola to tag along, he couldn't find any reasons to object. Although Jian Chen was giving in, Tai Ta was still not satisfied, but he didn't say anything. After this first day, he had already started to see Jian Chen as the pillar of the team. Whatever his decision was, Tai Ta would not object to it. Jian Chen's mind was better at strategy and he had more experience dealing with beasts than Tai Ta's. So it could be said that no matter what, Tai Ta would concede to Jian Chen. After the four teachers left, Jian Chen and Tai Ta didn't pay attention to Liang Xiaola and instead went to the dead bodies of the blue wolves. Since it was over 20 Class 1 monster cores, they wouldn't dare to squander this. Because the monster cores of the blue wolves were in their heads, Tai Ta and Jian Chen were trying to find a way to extract them. They definitely needed to strike and break at the part of the head where the monster core was, so Liang Xiaola's face went pale as she observed them. Perhaps Liang Xiaola had changed only slightly, it was almost as if she no longer felt out of her league. With great difficulty, she was able to quell the cowardly nature within her, as she diligently watched Jian Chen and Tai Ta work at extracting the cores. It was almost as if she was learning from the experience. The night passed quickly and peacefully after the initial Blue Wolves raid. As the dawn sun slowly rose over the edge of the horizon, the cross-legged Jian Chen finished his cultivation, and stood up to stretch. Just as Jian Chen stood up, he heard Tai Ta start to awaken as well. He followed Jian Chen up, and although the two were in the middle of cultivating, they were still aware of their surroundings. They had put up a guard while cultivating, and as long as the wind blew through the tall grass, then the pair would be able to track anyone. Tai Ta, go find some dry branches for the fire. I'll go fetch the magical beast meat, it's about time we prepare some breakfast, Jian Chen said. Oh. Without any objects, Tai Ta turned around and entered the forest to search for some dry firewood. Soon after, Tai Ta carried over a pile of dry firewood. At the same time, Jian Chen had prepared a huge chunk of bloody magical beast meat from the blue wolves that had been killed by them last night. Since there were no sources of water in the area, the magical beast meat was not washed. Instead, it was directly skewered with some sticks, and was placed above the bonfire to begin roasting. Not long after, the roasted magical beast meat began to emit a fragrant aroma. Although it did not have any spices, the quality of the magical beast meat was originally high. Moreover, The higher the class of the magical beast, the more delicious its meat would taste, and the more beneficial it was to the body. It was said that a class 5 magical beast's meat could even boost one's strength. Perhaps because she could smell the magical beast meat's fragrance, Liang Xiaola awoke from her nap on top of the tree, and jumped down. The 5.6-meter height was nothing to Liang Xiaola, who had reached the 8th Saint Force layer. Wow! It smells so good. Liang Xiaola bounced over to the bonfire, and seeing the golden magical beast meat dripping in rich oils, she could not help but swallow hard. Although she had eaten many exotic delicacies, she had never eaten wild game like this before. After all, eating the same type of meat for so long, one would obviously think of anything else as more appetizing, even if it was just some cabbage. Tai Ta shot a dissatisfied glance at Liang Xiaola, and murmured in a quiet voice, "Last night you were crying so loudly, now you've forgotten about it all so quickly. I hope that when we encounter more magical beasts later, you won't start wailing again." Tai Ta's voice was extremely soft and unclear. Most likely, aside from himself, nobody would have been able to clearly hear what he had whispered, even Jian Chen. Liang Xiaola looked at Tai Ta in curiosity. "Tai Ta, what are you saying?" Last night, the 4 teachers had called out Jian Chen's and Tai Ta's names, so Liang Xiaola had already learned their identities. "Ah, nothing." Tai Ta waved his hands as if he was feeling guilty for something. Liang Xiaola didn't pay any mind to it. She gazed at Jian Chen and Tai Ta and smiled. "No wonder you two are so powerful that you can kill 20 class 1 magical beasts. It turns out that you two are actually Tai Ta and Changyang Xiang Tian. The fact that I was able to meet you two was really great luck." The current Liang Xiaola seemed to be an entirely different person from the person yesterday evening. After only a single night, she seemed to already have pushed yesterday's events to the back of her mind. Now, her face didn't show a single trace of fear and dread from the thought of magical beasts. Jian Chen lifted the well-cooked magical beast meat, and then ripped of a section, throwing it over to Liang Xiaola, asking, "There are a lot of magical beasts in this forest. Moreover, if we don't stay for 3 more days, then we definitely cannot leave. Aren't you afraid?" Liang Xiaola accepted the piece of magical beast meat, and while she lightly chewed it, she said, "Although I'm still scared, I believe that I will eventually get used to it. In addition, the 2 of you are not much older than me, yet you both faced those fierce blue wolves last night without a trace of fear. The 2 of you even managed to slaughter all of them. This is much more impressive than those other boys." "Humph, those boys were so useless, the 5 of them together couldn't defeat a single magical beast. In the end, their incompetence forced me to get separated from my sisters." Liang Xiaola suddenly stood up, and loudly declared, "I've decided now. I will definitely use these next 2 days to properly learn from you 2 seniors." Hearing this, Jian Chen inwardly nodded to himself. Liang Xiaola's statement had already gained Jian Chen's approval. Although she was timid, and was extremely afraid of magical beasts, that wasn't important. The most important factor was she was willing to change her ways, and to learn more. After all, nobody was born with the ability to and understand everything. All knowledge retained is a result of one going out to learn it. Of course, Jian Chen was an exception. On the other hand, Liang Xiaola was born as the eldest daughter in a noble household. She had been spoiled since she was young, and had grown up in a sheltered environment. Obviously, she had never experienced any hardships. Thus, it was to be expected that she would inevitably be frightened during her first encounter with a savage magical beast. After all, this was the equivalent to an average person meeting a ghost for the first time. Anyone would feel fear. Chapter 39. Plans. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After eating breakfast, Jian Chen and Tai Ta both grabbed their respective weapons before continuing on with their journey. However, trailing behind them was the dainty Liang Xiaola, who was empty-handed. She looked around herself carefully due to her own weapon being long gone after she had been separated from her group and chased through the forest. Tai Ta lifted his battle axe. His clothes were already swapped out. This time, he was wearing blue wolf leather along with some grassroot to hold it together. His academy uniform was long since torn apart from yesterday's battle to the point where he couldn't wear it anymore. In the blink of an eye, another day came and went. By looking at the profits, they weren't as good as the first day, but they weren't bad either. In total, they had killed 70 magical beasts, making Liang Xiaola feel shocked. On this second day, Liang Xiaola went through a major change. Ever since the spectacle with the blue wolves, her entire personality had transformed. At the very least, whenever she saw a magical beast, she wouldn't scream in terror anymore. And whenever Tai Ta and Jian Chen would slaughter any enemy magical beast, she didn't even flinch at the sight of the blood. She was slowly starting to adapt to her situation. Not only that, but in the same day, she had unexpectedly learned much about the dangers of the forest and gained knowledge pertaining to them. Her capacity for learning was extremely high, and even Jian Chen couldn't help but admire it. Of course, what was important was looking at her talent for cultivation, since in the Tianyuan continent, one's own strength was what dictated who they were over everything else. Liang Xiaola was also extraordinarily smart. Although she wasn't very strong, she definitely didn't cause trouble for Tai Ta or Jian Chen, nor was she a burden like the two had previously thought she would be. She would stay behind the two, and whenever the two fought against a magical beast, she would stand far away so that she wouldn't get caught up in it. After that day, both Jian Chen or Tai Ta had a new levels of respect for Liang Xiaola, and no longer belittled her in their hearts. Later that night, the three of them sat by the campfire to count the pile of monster cores. Dear seniors, have you two really not condensed your saint weapons and become saints yet? Liang Xiaola asked as she stared at them with her bright eyes. What a strange question. Her clothes were already filled with holes from the trees and thorns that stabbed and cut into her, and her pretty face resembled a kitty from the whisker-like cuts. Since there were no water sources, she had to rely on drinking the blood of the magical beasts in order to stave off the thirst, and so there was no way she could wash off the filth on her face. If we were saints, why would I be using this axe? Tai Ta looked at his bundled up and heavily nicked battle axe with no small amount of dissatisfaction. After continued usage with Tai Ta's strength, the giant battle axe had finally worn out, the previously sharp edge was now becoming blunt after use. Even the previously sharp point on Jian Chen's corroded iron rod had nearly become flat. Liang Xiaola's face was full of admiration as she stared at the two. You two are really amazing, you're not even at the saint level yet and you can easily kill class 1 magical beasts. In my opinion, once you reach the saint level, you will be able to kill class 2 magical beasts with ease. Jian Chen shook his head. How would it be easy? These are magical beasts that were bred by the academy, so they have weak attack power. When we meet magical beasts with a stronger attack, then we will definitely have a harder time with it. Liang Xiaola nodded her head and said grimly, that's right. I've heard my dad say before that there are some amazing class 1 magical beasts that can spit out some low-level spells with a high amount of attack power. They're so strong, that some normal saints aren't powerful enough to beat them. Jian Chen looked at Tai Ta, who was focusing on the campfire. Tai Ta, right now there isn't anything in the second region that could stand a chance against us, so I want to move to the third region. How do you feel about that? Tai Ta gave it some thought before saying, right, the second region is already very easy for us since there isn't a challenge anymore. Okay then, Chanyang Xiang Tian, I'll enter the third region with you. It's time to see how strong the class 2 magical beasts really are. Hearing the two talk, Liang Xiaola who was sitting nearby said, it can't be, you two haven't reached the saint level and you still want to enter the third region to fight class 2 magical beasts. Without a saint weapon, there's no guarantee of survival, and the skin of a class 2 magical beast is stronger than that of class 1 magical beasts, so it's even tougher. You two only have a worn battle axe and corroded iron rod, so that'll make killing even harder. Not only that, but the environment in the third region isn't good at all. I've heard that there's even a marsh filled with poisonous vipers inside. There's a high chance of losing your lives in the dangerous third region. Tai Ta laughed as he looked at my weapon. That's right, Changyang Xiang Tian, over these past 2 days, our weapons have been in constant use, and my battle axe has lost its sharpness. Even your own iron rod is almost flat, so it would be hard to kill Class 2 magical beasts. Jian Chen laughed. There's no rush, there are still plenty of students in the second region. We still haven't met with other students because we're still far away from them. We should return tomorrow, and exchange monster cores for weapons, since the students would be definitely interested. Yeah, that's a good idea, Tai Ta nodded in agreement. Jian Chen continued, Liang Xiaola, let's split up tomorrow. If you're with other students, then you should be able to safely pass through your last day. After all, anyone who has been able to endure 2 days here must have some real skills. Liang Xiaola nodded wordlessly. Her expression was a bit disappointed. After all, she also knew of the third region's dangers. She was unsure if Jian Chen and Tai Ta would be able to go against those magical beasts. If she continued along with them, even if Jian Chen and Tai Ta agreed to let her accompany them, she would only be a baggage that would hold them down. The night passed without incident. Soon, the sky began to brighten. Jian Chen and Tai Ta finished their night of cultivation, and began to prepare breakfast. After the 3 of them had finished eating, the sun had already gradually began to rise into the sky. They continued on their way, however, this time, they had begun walking back in the direction they had come from. After 2 days of battles, the 2 boys had already become extremely skilled at sensing and avoiding danger, so it didn't take long for them to arrive at their destination. Under a large tree, 9 students in tattered clothing were tiredly sitting underneath, catching their breaths. They were a group of commoners mixed with some nobles. At the moment, their clothes were ripped all over the place, with some dried-out bloodstains covering them as well. They also sported injuries on their bodies, and not far from them was a carcass of a magical beast lying on the ground. Everyone, hold on for just a bit longer. This is already the last day. After this day ends, we can leave, a commoner student breathlessly said. It's unfortunate that we don't have enough magic stones yet, we still need 5 more. It looks like we still have to slaughter 5 more magical beasts to pass, said a young noble. Originally, the nobles hadn't been willing to stay together with the commoners, but after encountering the savage magical beast, they were immediately scared out of their wits. Faced with life or death, who would care about people's statuses? Protecting oneself was the greater priority. Thus, the few nobles had gradually decided to join the commoner students. After all, everyone knew there was strength in numbers. In addition, perhaps because the commoners had been raised in harsher environments, they did not show any signs of retreating when faced with savage magical beasts. This changed the arrogant nobles' views of the commoners. Eventually, they had all slowly become friends. Moreover, after constantly fighting against magical beasts, the 9 of them had become more comfortable working together. Eventually, they had formed an unexpected bond that held all of them together with close relationships. At that moment, there was a movement in the grass off in the distance. Everyone, be careful. A magical beast is attacking. A student immediately reacted and loudly warned the others. Instantly, the 9 of them stood up and stared with wary expressions towards the direction the sound had come from. The grass swayed vigorously. Eventually, they saw a figure wearing beast leather swinging a large hatchet around, cutting down the weeds in his way. Right after the group noticed him, they saw that there were 2 other figures following behind him as well. Although their clothes were tattered, it was obvious that they were all wearing the Kargath Academy uniforms. Perhaps because they had been traveling through the lush forest for so long, but their faces were dark, and they had random twigs in their hair. Only their general facial structures could be seen, their appearances were already indistinguishable. Realizing that the figures were people and not magical beasts, the 9 students immediately sighed in relief, and smiles slowly spread across their faces. At this point, if they could get those new people to join them, then the overall strength of their group would definitely rise. Hunting magical beasts would be much easier. In addition, all of them were smart enough to realize that these people who had stayed here for 3 days must be quite powerful. Of course, these 3 people were Jian Chen, Tai Ta, and Liang Xiaola. After backtracking for half a day, they had finally discovered a group of people. Since it was already the last of the 3 days, there weren't many people remaining in the forest. Most of them had already ran away, and so there were very few students that were still here. When Liang Xiaola's gaze rested on a gorgeous girl standing amongst the group of 9, she showed a pleasantly surprised expression. "Ah! Li Sha!" Liang Xiaola shouted out with an extremely excited voice, as she immediately flew towards the gorgeous girl. Hearing a slightly familiar voice, the girl blinked her large, shining eyes, and gazed at Liang Xiaola, who was running towards her, in slight confusion. Currently, Liang Xiaola's face was covered with quite a bit of dirt, making her look like a calico cat. Even if this girl called Li Sha did know Liang Xiaola well, it was difficult for her to recognize Liang Xiaola with her current appearance. Liang Xiaola rushed to the girl, and excitedly hugged her tightly. In a tone filled with joy, she said, "Li Sha, I hadn't imagined that I would have been able to see you again here. I thought you had already left the forest." Hearing the overly familiar voice, the girl named Li Sha finally recognized who Liang Xiaola was. Pleasantly surprised, she said, "You're Xiao Lu." Chapter 40. Exchanging Weapons /P. You are listening at novelfull.audio. That's right, Li Sha. I'm Xiao Lu, Liang Xiaola spoke, her voice dripping with emotion as she confirmed her friend's words. "Xiao Lu, it really is you, that's great. I thought that you had already escaped from this place, I never would have imagined that I would see you here." Li Sha, the girl in front of Liang Xiaola, was just as happy, and continued to hug her lost friend. The 2 girls joined in a tight embrace. Li Sha was laughing out loud. "Liang Xiaola, I didn't think we'd be able to meet again after losing each other in the forest. This really makes me happy." "Hello," said a youth wearing clothing as tattered as the other 2, "I'm so glad to have met the 2 of you here. How should I put this? I'm not sure if you want, but would you be willing to join our group? If you do, I can certainly guarantee that together our group will be much stronger and consequently will make hunting magical beasts a lot easier. And besides, danger lurks around every corner in these woods, it'd be better if we worked together." His tone was first likable as he walked up to Jian Chen and Tai Ta, but as soon as he saw that Jian Chen's clothes were entirely crimson with fresh blood, he couldn't help but express shock. The youth seriously doubted that the blood was all from Jian Chen, because anyone who lost that much blood would definitely be beyond weak. There was no way such a person could firmly stand there, with such a sharp look. Jian Chen shook his head, politely refusing, "I'm sorry, but we were just planning to leave this place, so we cannot join your group." The youth had an expression of regret on his face, however, he still reconciled, "My 2 fellow students, although the magical beasts here are quite formidable, we have strength in numbers. As long as everyone is willing to work together, even if we meet 2 magical beasts at once, they definitely won't pose any threat. If everyone hands over 2 Class 1 magic stones, I believe that we will soon gather enough." The youth continued to press the issue. His gaze was quite sharp, and it was obvious that he had already realized that Jian Chen's and Tai Ta's strengths were above average. "We really do not have any other options. The 2 of us have already decided to leave here, so we cannot join your group. Please forgive us." In order to reciprocate the formal request, Jian Chen's tone was just as amiable. Hearing that Jian Chen and Tai Ta were set on leaving, the youth could not help but be disappointed. He really could not understand why, although only 1 out of the 3 days was remaining, the 2 people refused to stay. As long as they paid up 2 Class 1 magic stones, they'd be able to successfully join. Yet, Jian Chen and Tai Ta still chose to leave the area. Could it be that the 2 of them really wanted to pass up such an opportunity? The youth thought that Jian Chen and Tai Ta had given up and wanted to leave the forest. He couldn't have ever imagined that their leaving actually meant leaving the second region to enter the third region, not actually leaving the forest. At that moment, Tai Ta glanced at the battle axe that one of the students was holding. His eyes lit up in happiness, and he directly walked over to the student with an intrepid air, and asked in a muffled voice, "Hey, if I give you 2 Class 1 magic stones, will you trade your battle axe for them?" Asking this, Tai Ta pulled out the battle axe on his back with one hand, and used his other hand to retrieve from his space belt 2 Class 1 magic stones that were still covered in fresh blood. It was at that moment that the group of people realized that the large battle axe in Tai Ta's hands was covered in fresh blood. The entire surface had been dyed crimson. The appearance alone was beyond shocking. It looked as if it was a murder weapon that had been constantly doused by blood. What was even more disbelieving was that the battle axe, made of firm metal as hard as steel, had already been completely riddled with cracks. Moreover, some parts of the blade were even bent. Most people would not be able to believe this sight. They had all assumed that when Tai Ta had chosen his weapon, it had been like this from the beginning. There was no way they could have imagined that all of the axe's damages had been caused by Tai Ta himself. The student with the intrepid air looked at the beaten-up axe in front of him, which was so red that it looked like it had been made from blood, and was at a loss for a moment. When the other students heard Tai Ta's request, their eyes immediately lit up, and looked at the intrepid student with looks of envy, as if they were about to offer up their own weapons to trade with Tai Ta. "My fellow student, I can exchange this sword of mine with you." A student carrying a giant one-handed sword walked over to Tia Ta and said with a smile. Hearing, Tai Ta looked down at the battle axe that was in his grip, shook his head and spoke, "No need, I still prefer to use the battle axe." Hearing this, the male suddenly had a face full of disappointment. At this moment, getting 2 Class 1 magic stones was more important than anything else. Not to mention him, if the others could, they would also be willing to trade their weapons to Tai Ta for 2 Class 1 magic stones. Even if their weapons were worth more than 2 Class 1 magic stones, they would still not hesitate. The tall and sturdy male was not dumb. After considering it for a bit, he happily handed over his battle axe to fulfill the exchange. Who would be willing to refuse such a profitable exchange? After the exchange was completed, the group of people began to look at Tai Ta with a different light. A few of the smarter students had already connected the battle axe's battered state to the possibility that Tai Ta had caused it. From this point, they could directly confirm Tai Ta's extraordinary strength. Otherwise, why else would he just casually hand over 2 Class 1 magic stones? This place wasn't like outside. Before entering the forest, the school administration had already confiscated any devices the students had. They had even patted the students' bodies down to thoroughly check. There was absolutely no way the magic stone could have been brought in from the outside. The only way that magic stones could be gained inside the forest was to hunt magical beasts. However, there was just one thing the people couldn't understand. If Tai Ta and Jian Chen had the strengths to hunt magical beasts, why didn't they want to stay in the forest for all 3 days? After all, the Academy's rules clearly dictated that they could only pass if they stayed for 3 days and paid up 2 Class 1 magic stones. If only one was fulfilled, they wouldn't pass. Could it be that they don't care about the rewards? Or perhaps they had lied about leaving, and actually just didn't want to kill magical beasts together with the few of us. Everyone could not help but think of these possibilities. When considering these thoughts, a few of the people immediately began to gaze at Jian Chen and Tai Ta with expressions of discontent. Jian Chen did not pay any mind to their expressions. He looked at the Liang Xiaola and the girl she was hugging, and said, "Liang Xiaola, since you found your friend now, why don't you just stick with this group? They have more people too." Liang Xiaola slowly separated from the girl, and looked back at Jian Chen and Tai Ta. She nodded, "Then you two have to be careful." Afterwards, Tai Ta and Jian Chen didn't bother wasting any time, and immediately left the area. After the two of them had left, the girl called Li Sha asked in a resentful tone, "Xiao Lu, who are they? They're so arrogant that they don't even think they should be with us. Li Sha, you're mistaken. It's not that they don't want to be together with you guys, they really do want to leave here. Liang Xiaola explained. That can't be. Li Sha exclaimed in disbelief. Li Sha, the fact that they could casually give away a Class 1 magic stone means that the two of them have the strength to kill magical beasts. Plus, when they were trading the two magical stones away for the weapon, it was obvious that they were planning on continuing to fight. How could they possibly be leaving this place? That's right, Xiao Lu, you've been tricked by them. A youth standing on the side added. Liang Xiaola smiled, they're definitely leaving this place, but they didn't explain it clearly to you guys. They want to leave the second region, and move on to the third region to hunt the Class 2 magical beasts. What? Liang Xiaola, what kind of joke are you trying to pull? It's impossible for the two of them to go to the third region to hunt Class 2 magical beasts. Could it be that their strengths have already reached Saint level? But that can't be right either. If they had reached the Saint level, then there would be no need to change weapons. Those two are really reckless, to want to go to the third region. They're definitely seeking death. Immediately following Yang Xiaola's words, the group of people immediately broke into chaos as they began to discuss in a frenzy amongst each other. None of them thought that Jian Chen and Tai Ta would be able to survive the third region. Li Sha pulled at Liang Xiaola's hands, and in a clearly disbelieving tone, she asked, Xiao Lu, they aren't really crazy enough to run over to the third region, right? Liang Xiaola nodded, that's right, they really did go to the third region. Li Sha, you cannot underestimate the two of them, they're really formidable. Liang Xiaola said with conviction. Could it be that the two of them really are saints? Li Sha asked in shock. The school administration had clearly declared that all students that were saints had to enter the third region. There was no way they could have appeared in the second region. Liang Xiaola shook her head, no, their powers haven't reached saint level yet, because they still haven't condensed their saint weapons. Hearing this, Li Sha's shock grew even more pronounced. Without reaching saint level, surviving in the second region was already difficult enough, let alone being in the third region. After all, the magical beasts in the third region were Class 2 magical beasts, which weren't any small amount stronger than Class 1 magical beasts. The two classes could not even be compared. Li Sha and Liang Xiaola were close friends. Therefore, Liang Xiaola didn't feel the need to hide anything from Li Sha. In a soft voice, she said, Li Sha, I'll just tell you this. Yesterday, I personally witnessed the two of them kill 70+ magical beasts by themselves. Li Sha was beyond shocked by this, as she exclaimed, what? Xiao Lu, are you joking? The two of them killed 70+ magical beasts by themselves in one day. Li Sha was so astonished that she couldn't contain her voice. She had gradually become louder and louder, until the other 8 people were able to hear her quite clearly. In that instant, all of their expressions changed at the thought of Jian Chen and Tai Ta achieving what Liang Xiaola had said, and their expressions were beyond disbelief. Li Sha, what did you say? Which two people were able to kill 70+ Class 1 magical beasts in a day? A youth asked. He could not accept the possibility that the two people were actually Jian Chen and Tai Ta, whom they had just met. Li Sha tried to calm her breathing, and grasped at her chest before pointing to Liang Xiaola. In a trembling voice, she said, Xiaola said that she personally witnessed the two people just now kill 70+ magical beasts in one day. Li Sha's tone reflected the fact that she thought such a possibility was inconceivable.